I'm not proud of how calm I was when he screamed it. Most people talk about the moment their life explodes like it's a car crash. Glass, noise, panic. Mine was quiet. My boss stood 3 feet from me, red in the face, spit on his bottom lip, eyes sweeping the room to make sure everyone was watching. Get out, he barked. Then louder for the audience. Get out and stay out. I didn't argue. I didn't even look down at the screen I'd just locked. I looked at the clock on the wall, memorized 10:42 a.m., and set my badge on the desk because I'd rather choose where to put it than feel it taken from me. He was the kind of manager who loved open floor plans because they made his voice travel. Our corner of the Santa Monica office had those long benches with no drawers and the tasteful plants that die if nobody pretends to care for them. He liked to perch on the edge of a desk with his ankle on his knee, like a talk show host, and ask questions that weren't questions. Why are we behind? Who signed off on this? Whose idea was that? I learned a year ago that none of those had answers that made us safer. My job became delivering clarity without making him look unclear. There's a way to do that. It just costs more than overtime. This morning started like all the other ones where he needed blood. Stand up at 9:10. A circle of people trying to look small, sticky notes in neat lines on a glass wall that photographed well for investors. He pointed at the integration tile and said, "Who owns this?" I raised my hand because lying is worse than being yelled at. He smiled like I'd volunteered for a trick, then gestured me toward the TV where he'd prepared a slide that took my words out of context. The metrics were fine. The dates were fine. But the story he told with them was that I'd blocked momentum by refusing to greenlight something that wasn't ready. He wanted the room to learn that caution equals insubordination. I said, evenly, that I didn't greenlight it because it failed 3 of 7 resilience tests and that pushing it would burn our pager rotation. I said it in front of a team that knew I don't bluff. He didn't like my tone. He didn't like that eyes shifted from him to me. "Are you trying to embarrass me?" he asked, softly first, then louder when I didn't answer the way he'd rehearsed. What I said next wasn't brave. It was just honest. "I'm trying not to ship something that breaks for our users." That's when his voice went up. Not a shout, a performative crescendo. He stood, squared his shoulders, and turned me into a black and white lesson about teamwork. It sounds dramatic if you weren't there. If you were, it was just Tuesday. The part people remember is the yelling. What I remember are the small things that happened around it. Priya's hands went flat on her laptop, palms pressed like she was smoothing cloth. Luis's cursor stopped moving in his code window. The new product manager, Mia, who still wore her company lanyard like security, tucked her hair behind her ear and stared at the charging port on her phone as if a text could save me. Someone coughed into a cup. Someone's chair creaked. I thought about the coffee I hadn't finished and whether they'd toss it when I left. It wasn't numbness. It was choosing what to notice. My boss, Mike, if you want a name, walked toward me and pointed at the door like we were a cartoon. "Pack your things," he said, which is funny in an office where everything is communal, and your things are a mug and a plant you have to ask facilities to water. "HR will escort you." He said it loud enough that HR heard him through a glass wall and pretended not to. He liked invoking departments like talismans. I nodded once. He waited for me to protest because anger would have made his day simpler. I didn't give him that. I powered down, closed the lid with a soft click, and stood. The click sounded like the end of a season. Nobody followed me to my desk, which was just a partition away. My backpack already had my charger, a notebook with a black elastic band, and a pen that doesn't skip. I slid the mug, a white one with a tiny crack in the handle, into the center of the bag and zipped it in like it mattered. I loosened the Velcro cable tie I always keep in the front pocket and wrapped it around nothing, because habits survive, even when jobs don't. I pulled a Post-it from the stack and wrote a 4-line list for whoever inherits my terminal. Repo, ENV, build, run. I signed it with an initial I don't like typing in chats. The note was for the team, not for him. I could feel conversations trying not to form as I walked the aisle. "Rough," someone said under their breath, like weather. "Man," someone else offered, halfway between sympathy and relief that it wasn't them. The door to the stairwell is metal and heavy and slow. It makes you hold it until it closes. I let it find its own speed. On the cement steps down to the lobby, I realized I'd forgotten to clear my whiteboard. 3 boxes with arrows, a crude sketch of the circuit that kept failing under load when the cloud provider throttled, in a way their sales deck promised. It wouldn't. Someone will erase it this afternoon. The drawing won't make sense to anyone who didn't feel the pager vibrate at 2:13 a.m. last month. HR did call me, eventually on the first floor, near the ficus no one takes responsibility for. "Ethan, can you come by?" The voice was polite in the way people are when they're reading policy. I told them I was by the elevators. The HR rep came around the corner holding a manila envelope like a peace offering. It had a form that says separation and a pen with the company logo. I signed where the flags were. She told me I could keep the laptop charger. I said I already had one. She asked for the badge like she was afraid I'd make it a scene. I handed it over. We both said thanks at the same time, then laughed at the choreography of it. The lobby smelled like burnt coffee and lemon cleaner, which is how I'll remember the place more than any launch or off-site. Outside, the light off Colorado Avenue was too bright for the hour, and a delivery truck hissed to a stop, brakes exhaling like the building finally did. I sat on a low wall under a jacaranda that had started dropping purple onto the sidewalk, and watched a pair of scooters lean into each other like tired dogs. My phone buzzed in my pocket. 2 messages, both variants of "Are you okay?" from coworkers who couldn't afford to be seen typing them upstairs. I replied with, "I'm good," not because it was true, but because it was the kind of answer that doesn't make more work for anyone. I thought about calling my father. He would have said the thing he always says when I tell him a story that sounds unfair. "Did you keep your word?" It's a simple metric, and it doesn't fix anything, but it keeps me from telling the wrong story about what happened. I had kept my word. I had told the truth in a room full of adults, and gotten the consequence for it. I texted him a thumbs up because he hates long messages, and because you don't need paragraphs to send a weather report. Walking to the garage felt like leaving a movie halfway through. The concrete was cool, the kind of early summer morning that doesn't believe in heat yet, and my footsteps echoed in a way that made me sound confident. At my car, I paused with my hand on the handle and looked at my reflection in the tinted glass. Not the deep, cinematic stare-down, just a half-second to register that I was out. Sometimes you have to admit the sentence is finished before you can write another one. On Lincoln, traffic was gentle. A cyclist in a neon jacket passed me like I wasn't moving. The radio station I usually leave on for noise suddenly sounded like a show I didn't like anymore, so I turned it off. The quiet made room for a list. Cancel the building access I set up for a weekend deployment we won't need now. Ping Priya my personal email in case she needs the unit tests we wrote after hours. Upload the documentation I kept in my private repo so nobody has to rebuild the ladder I already climbed. These are not noble thoughts. They're just the small crafts of leaving clean. If you're looking for rage here, I don't have any. Anger is an expensive hobby, and today was already costly. What I had was a sense of edges. The edges of my time, the edges of my attention, the edges of what I'll call a job, if it needs me to be smaller to stay. I parked under a eucalyptus near a grocery store because I wanted to stand in an aisle where the biggest decision is paper or plastic, and where nobody knows your name unless it's on a loyalty card. I bought bread, eggs, and a small jar of apricot jam, because when I was a kid, we opened one on the morning after a bad day, like proof that sweetness doesn't check your mood first. Back in the car, I sat for a minute and watched a man load water into a trunk, like he was training for something. My phone buzzed again, an unknown number, then a voicemail icon. I didn't press play. There's a rhythm to consequences, and you get to choose when you clap. I put the car in drive. The tires kissed the painted line, and the morning settled into itself like a bed you've finally remade. The strange thing about humiliation is how it follows you home, even when no one else does. I didn't drive angry that day. I just drove slow. The kind of slow where the turn signal clicks louder than the engine. The ocean was on my left, glassy and smug. It always looks more honest after you've lost something. I took the coastal route instead of the freeway because I wanted distance that wasn't measured in miles. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. The security system chirped like it was greeting a stranger. My house, the one nobody at work had ever seen, looked exactly like the day before. Clean lines, glass panels, view of the Pacific that used to make me proud. I dropped my backpack by the marble island and realized how absurd it looked there. That beat-up canvas bag with a cracked zipper in a kitchen worth more than my boss's car. Yeah, that's the part Mike never knew. The part nobody knew. Before I worked for him, before I decided I needed to be normal for a while, I built something. 2 years of sleepless coding with a partner I met in grad school. We sold it for 8 figures to a holding company that now owns, among many things, the firm where I'd just been fired. That irony still makes me laugh sometimes, not the kind of laugh you share. The quiet one that happens when life turns into a punchline, too neat to be fiction. I poured myself a glass of water, stood by the window, and watched the line where sea meets sky fade into gray. The house was big enough to echo when I breathed too loudly. My therapist once told me I bought too much silence. She was probably right. At 8:23 p.m., I got a text from an old contact. Heard what happened at Lyricsoft. You good? It was Mason, my former co-founder, the guy who could read a quarterly report like a detective novel. I'm fine, I wrote back. Mike finally snapped. Of course he did, he answered. We warned the parent company about him. You know the irony, right? I stared at the message for a few seconds. What irony? The board's been trying to track down the original system architect for the acquisition review. Guess who that is? That made me laugh for real this time. I leaned back against the counter, phone warm in my hand. They don't know it's me? I typed. Guess not. But they're about to, he replied. But that was just the beginning. When I started at Lyricsoft, I'd promised myself anonymity. After selling our platform, I'd taken a small advisory role, then stepped out quietly. Money was never the problem. The problem was noise. Investors, reporters, friends who wanted to pick your brain for free. I wanted a job that paid less but meant more, where nobody expected me to be a headline. So I used my middle name, dropped my startup from the resume, and joined as a senior engineer. I didn't need the paycheck, I needed the routine. At first, Mike liked me. I solved problems fast and didn't talk too much. But people like him only like you until they realize they can't control what makes you good. He started taking credit in meetings, rewriting my reports, calling me the back-end guy when clients were on calls. Small things, small knives. When our infrastructure survived a 3-day outage that killed half our competitors, he told the team it was a testament to strong leadership. He never said whose. I let it go. Because fighting people like him just gives them more stage time. But over months, the rot spread. He'd schedule check-ins that were really lectures. He'd leave me off invites to client reviews so he could stumble through my work and then blame me for not being there. I started saving screenshots. Not out of revenge, but self-defense. The night before he fired me, he'd emailed at 11:42 p.m. Need your report by 7, don't care how. I'd already sent it at 9 odd. He just hadn't opened it. He wanted a reason. I didn't give him one. So when he shouted, "Get out," he thought he was erasing a name on a payroll line. He didn't realize he was deleting the guy whose code the company still runs on. That night, I sat at my desk by the window, opened my personal laptop, and scrolled through old directories. The system architecture diagrams were still there. The ones I'd written in 2018, long before Lyricsoft bought us. The same architecture their cloud product now depends on. There was a strange comfort in knowing I didn't need to lift a finger. The universe already had a timer running. At 10:01 p.m., Mason sent another message. Board meeting tomorrow morning. CEO wants to meet the original engineer. You want in? You're joking. Dead serious. They're finally connecting dots. 10 a.m. downtown. I'll make sure your name's on the list. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. I stared at that message long after the screen dimmed. Sometimes justice doesn't need a hammer, just patience. I walked through the house one last time before bed. The pool lights shimmered against the glass, waves whispering somewhere beyond the hill. I thought of Mike's face, that red, vein-throbbing mask of superiority. I wondered if he slept well. Probably. Men like that usually do, until something bigger than them decides not to. I set the alarm for 6:30. No dreams, no anger, no plans. Just a quiet conviction growing like static behind my ribs. Tomorrow they'd meet the man their manager told to stay out. And I'd walk right back in. Not through his office door, but through one he'd never even been invited to. That was the moment I stopped being the employee he fired and started becoming the problem he couldn't explain. The next morning felt like any other, except quieter. The kind of quiet that happens before a storm decides where to land. I dressed the same way I always do. Jeans, plain shirt, no watch. When you walk into a room where people are used to counting status, the most powerful thing you can wear is indifference. Traffic on PCH was light. The ocean shimmered beside me, gray-blue and wide open. I could smell salt and diesel from the morning boats. I caught myself smiling at how absurd it all was. A man fired for being difficult, now heading to meet the board of the company that bought his code. At 9:45, I parked under a steel awning downtown, the kind of structure designed to look minimalist but cost more than my first car. A tall glass tower reflected the sky like it was built to impress God. Inside, the air smelled of filtered coffee and ambition. A receptionist greeted me by name, my real one, not the middle name I'd used at LyricSoft. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks," she said, smiling the way people smile when they've been briefed. "They're expecting you on 31. 31? The executive floor, the one Mike liked to mention as if he'd been there before. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped into silence thick enough to make your shoes sound too loud. A man in a charcoal suit, the CEO's assistant, extended a hand. "Mr. Brooks, thank you for coming." I nodded. "You said it was about the integration system?" "Yes, sir. Mr. Lawrence will brief you personally. This way, please." We entered a boardroom with windows taller than some houses. The table gleamed like it had opinions. Around it sat a half-dozen executives, their smiles polite and practiced, and at the far end of the room, pacing with a tablet in his hand like he owned oxygen itself, was Mike. For a second he didn't see me. He was too busy telling someone about his team's architecture. The words dripped with fake modesty. Then the CEO, a calm, silver-haired man in his 60s, turned toward me. "Ah, Ethan Brooks, the man I've been wanting to meet?" Mike's head snapped up. His mouth opened, then closed like someone had hit pause. "I'm sorry, who?" he said, blinking hard. The CEO gestured toward me. "Ethan is the original system architect from NetPulse, the startup we acquired 3 years ago. The core framework LyricSoft runs on now, his design." Silence. Thick, heavy, beautiful. Mike's face did a slow dance between confusion, disbelief, and a dawning horror he couldn't disguise. "Wait? You mean—" "Yes," I interrupted, keeping my tone neutral. "That's the one you fired yesterday." The CEO turned sharply. "You fired him?" Mike stammered. "It was a misunderstanding. I wasn't aware." "I believe you weren't," I said, and something in my voice made the room lean forward. The CEO gestured toward the screen on the wall. "Ethan, would you mind walking us through your original failover concept? We're reviewing system scalability for the next phase, and I'd like to hear it from the source." "Of course." I stepped forward. plugged in the drive I'd brought, the same diagrams I'd drawn years ago, and started talking. Not loud, not performative, just clear. Lines, modules, redundancy protocols, load balancing under stress conditions. My language was calm, fluent, confident, the way truth always sounds when it's finally allowed to breathe. At first, Mike tried to nod along, pretending he understood, but every diagram I showed cut another string of his control. The executives began asking me questions. To me, not through him. After 10 minutes, his tablet hung limply in his hand. "And here," I said, pointing at the diagram, "is where the current delay issues originate. The bottleneck isn't the system. It's the leadership decision that bypassed our testing threshold." The CEO folded his hands. "You mean this was a management directive?" "Yes, sir." "Whose directive?" The air thickened. I could have said it outright. Instead, I let the silence do the talking. Mike shifted in his chair, color draining from his face. "That's under review," he muttered. The CEO nodded slowly. "Understood." He turned to me again. "Ethan, I'd like you to stay on as a technical advisor. We're reevaluating the local leadership structure. I assume you're available?" I smiled slightly. I think my schedule just opened up. A few people chuckled. Not at me, but at the precision of timing. Mike didn't move, didn't speak. His eyes were glassy with the kind of panic that only comes from realizing the world isn't built around you, after all. After the meeting, the CEO walked me to the elevator himself. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "You built the foundation of what we do here, and we let someone treat you like an obstacle." "Doesn't need an apology," I said. "Just correction." He nodded like he understood the weight of that word. As I turned to leave, I heard a voice behind me. "Ethan," Mike said, stepping into the hall, desperation leaking into every syllable. "Wait." I turned. He looked smaller somehow. His perfect posture collapsed, his voice soft instead of sharp. "I didn't know," he said. "I swear if I'd known who you were," I cut him off, "you'd have pretended to respect me." "That's not the same thing." His mouth opened, then closed again. "Good luck, Mike," I said. "You're going to need it." The elevator doors slid shut between us. As it descended, I watched my reflection in the brushed steel and realized I wasn't shaking. Not proud, not angry, just steady. Because that's what justice feels like when it finally shows up. Not fire, not noise, just gravity, and then silence, the kind that means something's gone wrong. By the time I reached the lobby, I already knew. Mike's access badge wouldn't work tomorrow. The company would phrase it politely in an email. Transitioning leadership to align with strategic priorities. But everyone who'd been in that room would remember the sound of his voice breaking when he realized the man he'd fired was the one who built everything beneath his feet. Outside, the sun had climbed high enough to burn the fog off the coast. I walked to my car, the wind carrying that clean electric smell of salt and endings. The same security guard who'd waved me out the day before gave a hesitant nod as I passed. "Back already?" he asked. "Just visiting," I said and smiled. I got in, started the engine, and pulled onto the highway heading west. Home was waiting, quiet, glassy, patient. And for the first time in a long time, I was driving toward something instead of away from it. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. By the time I reached Malibu, the sky had started to soften. That kind of pale gold that only happens when the sun begins to forgive everything it touched that day. The Pacific stretched beside me, wide and calm, as if it knew a secret I'd just learned. The phone in the passenger seat wouldn't stop vibrating. Missed calls. Unknown numbers. I didn't need to look to know one of them was Mike. I didn't answer. The road curved along the cliffs, opening to a view that still takes my breath away no matter how many mornings I wake up to it. The ocean looked endless, the kind of blue that makes you forget there's a world full of people who think power means volume. When I pulled into my driveway, the security gate recognized the car and slid open with its usual hum. Gravel whispered under the tires. The house stood there. Glass, steel, quiet confidence, not screaming for attention, just existing like proof. It had cost $15 million and a lifetime of sleepless nights before that. To me, it never felt like a trophy. It was just a place where the noise stopped. I parked under the pergola, killed the engine, and sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, the kind of stillness that feels earned. Then I saw the reflection of headlights behind me. A black sedan rolled up the driveway, stopping just outside the gate. A man stepped out. Tailored suit, expensive shoes, the air of someone who'd never been told to wait for anything. Mr. Lawrence, the CEO. He waved once, a quiet, respectful gesture, and I got out to meet him halfway. "Beautiful place," he said, his voice half admiration, half disbelief. "Depends on the light," I replied. "Some days it feels like a cage with a view." He smiled faintly. "If this is a cage, I wouldn't mind a sentence." For a moment, we just stood there, watching the water turn orange with sunset. The waves move slow, deliberate, as if they understood the rhythm of endings. "I wanted to see where you built all of that," he said finally. "The code, the discipline, the calm under pressure. I had to understand the kind of man who walks out of a building and doesn't burn it down on his way out." "I stopped needing to prove I was right a long time ago," I told him. "Turns out silence finishes the argument better than shouting ever could." He nodded, eyes narrowing with something close to respect. "You could have sued," he said, "or gone public. You could have embarrassed him." "I didn't have to," I answered. "He did that himself." He chuckled, low and genuine. "We'll be in touch about the advisor position. The board wants you back in some capacity, on your own terms this time." "I'll think about it," I said. "But I like building more than managing. I've had my fill of titles that mean nothing." He nodded again, glanced back at the house one last time, and said quietly, "You handled it the right way, Ethan. Not everyone does." "I didn't do it for them," I said. "I did it for the quiet." He left a few minutes later. The sedan's taillights disappeared into the dusk, like a line erased from a page. I walked up the stone path to the patio. The automatic lights came on in sequence, soft pools of gold guiding me toward the glass doors. Inside, the place smelled faintly of cedar and the ocean air that always finds its way in. I kicked off my shoes, poured a small drink, and sat down on the steps overlooking the water. The tide was high, the waves breaking steady against the rocks. I took a sip and listened to the rhythm, each crash like a period at the end of a long, unfinished sentence. My phone buzzed once more. Another call from a blocked number. I turned it over, face down, screen against the wood. Some sounds don't deserve to be heard. Instead, I thought about the faces from yesterday. The interns who kept their heads down, the people who whispered apologies they couldn't say out loud, the ones who'd been too afraid to stand up. I wasn't mad at them. They'd learn eventually that silence can be rebellion too, if you hold it long enough. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sound of laughter from a house down the beach. Someone was hosting a party. Music, voices, clinking glasses. I smiled. Let them. I'd had enough audiences for one lifetime. I looked out across the ocean, the last bit of light turning the waves to molten silver, and thought about what revenge really means. People imagine it's fire, dramatic, loud, something you can post online. But the truth is simpler. Revenge is driving home with the windows down, the air clean, your name still yours. Revenge is peace. When the sky finally went dark, I stood, finished my drink, and went inside. The motion sensors dimmed behind me, leaving only the reflection of the ocean on the glass. I put my phone on the counter where it vibrated once, then stopped for good. I didn't need to answer any more. The story had already answered itself. I turned off the last light and walked down the hall toward the bedroom, each step quiet, certain, final. Because sometimes victory doesn't sound like applause. Sometimes it's just the sound of your own door closing and staying closed. Peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the moment you realize you don't owe anyone an explanation for finally being free.